And I remember like as the conversation sort of evolved with my husband, I said, you know what? I think we should just do IVF. I think it'll, being a little bit of a control freak, I was like, I could like control a couple of little things. Again, part of my naiveness. And I was like, yep, that's just going to be the plan. We are going to, I decided for both of us, I've decided that we are just going to do IVF no matter what, right? Like that was sort of my thinking. And so after the blood work, the lab results came back. So we met with the fertility specialist. And it was like the joke was on me, right? It wasn't that I was choosing to do IVF. I had no choice. The only way I would would happen, the only way that I would get pregnant was if I had scientific intervention.
I am so incredibly excited to welcome my next guest, Walli Miller. She'd reached out to me on Podmatch, which has been a wonderful resource for finding amazing guests for the podcast. And we have talked a lot about the financial component of egg freezing and IVF. And so this is going to be an amazing conversation about that. But it's also personal to you because you've also gone through IVF. So welcome to Quiet the Clock. I'm so excited to have you here and have this conversation.
Thank you, Beth, so much for having me. We were talking sort of offline beforehand, and I've been on several other podcasts, but this is nerve-wracking, right? There's like a lot of emotions tied up to money generally, but when we're talking about money and fertility issues and sort of that entire journey, it's like a balloon waiting to burst of emotions.
I know, we talk so much about the different layers and complexities of egg freezing and IVF, and money is such a huge one. And even outside of money for fertility, money, period. Like I see that so much in my practice as a therapist, like just people's relationships with money, people's emotions around money, couples conflicts around money. So it is such an emotional topic. But before we dive specifically into fertility and money, can you share your journey? Because your journey is incredible. And that's also topics we talk about on the podcast is sort of these untraditional paths and sort of taking leaps and following a passion and doing something sort of different. So I'd love for you to share that story first, because you have a great story.
Okay, so as you mentioned, my name is Wally, and I'm the owner and founder of Financially Thriving Money Coaching. And that really came out of a place of sort of understanding that giving people information or financial literacy or sending them to podcasts or books or blogs wasn't enough. There was like another piece missing, right? In general, we all know what we should be doing with our money, but knowing what to do with our money and actually doing it, there's like a disconnect there. So I started in the personal finance space as a blogger, as an anonymous blogger, sort of sharing my journey to financial independence. And when we talk about financial independence, for me, it was really giving myself the option to work or not work, having sort of enough money that it would pay for my cost of living and my travel and my lifestyle, right? So I started off as an anonymous blogger, sort of sharing what I was learning, some of the mistakes we were making, some of the wins we were having with money. From that, I then became a freelance writer. I got hired on for a couple of different sites who hired me to write articles around money. I think one of the things that I didn't see, especially, a few years ago when I started, which was 2016, 2017, around that time, was that a lot of the voices sounded the same. A lot of it was shame-driven, get out of debt, stay away from credit cards and things like that. And I didn't really resonate. I thought I was good with money because I did use credit cards, but I paid off the balances, right? So I was like, I don't have credit card debt, I'm good. Now I did have student loans and I also had a car note and things like that. But in my mind, I was good with money. And I had this sort of situation happen where I was in a job that I absolutely loved, but then until I didn't, right? Until management change. My boss, who I loved, left, and a really sort of ideal work environment became quite toxic. And I didn't really understand before then when people would say like they had the Monday blues or they hated their job. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not that I loved every single minute, but I really found work that I got fulfillment out of. It was challenging. It was, you know, good in so many different ways. But when the work environment began to change, I realized that I couldn't just quit, and I felt trapped. I really felt stuck.
Oh, and I felt that too in many points in my career. And I think there is so much fear, especially financially, right? Because that's we look at that as such a means of security. And so I think so many people can find themselves in a place that feels trapped. And then what that starts to translate as emotionally, right? What it feels like to feel trapped and have like the Sunday scaries and the Monday blues. And it's not a good place to be. But I think I'm so curious to keep hearing your knowledge and what you share with your clients. But I think without that, it could feel hopeless, like that there's no way out because this is the paycheck I get every 2 weeks. I know what it is. I have the health benefits. So yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you up there, but I resonate with that because I felt that at many points in my career too.
It was, for me, one of the things that happened was that I realized that if I missed a paycheck, but certainly if I missed 2 paychecks, I was going to lose everything I had worked for. So the car, the home, everything that I had worked for, I was going to lose. And I couldn't just leave. I couldn't just like get up and quit, right? And, there was like a worry of like, would I get paid as much as I do? Would I be able to find another sort of ideal work environment? And I didn't like feeling like my hands were tied behind my back. And I, it was almost at the right time. It was quite serendipitous, perhaps. But I read this article about a couple who had retired in their 40s. And I remember reading the article and kind of just like put it aside. And during this time, I remembered the article and I went digging for it. I'm like Googling, couple retires, in their 40s to travel the world. And I reread the article multiple times, actually. And
I'm like, can you send me that article, please?
Yeah.
I want to retire.
I read the article and then they had a blog and I followed the blog. And from there, I went down this whole rabbit hole. And really what happened was that I read this article like after a terrible work week and it was a Friday. And I spent the entire weekend reading, learning, watching, YouTubes, listening to podcasts, had a whole bunch of spreadsheets, writing notes down in a notebook about what they were doing. And what I realized was that they were doing something that I thought I was doing well, which was, I do set aside money every paycheck, right? But I was not setting aside nearly enough, right? My $25 from every paycheck going to a savings account was not going to get me there. So that was number one. Number two was I didn't truly know where my money was going, right? I could pay my credit card bill, but when I thought about what did I actually spend money on, I didn't really know. And I sort of like looked around thinking about where was my money going. And I realized I was quite an impulsive shopper, right? I would go to Target for like toilet paper and laundry detergent and leave with candles and pillows.
I know, but Target's the trap. The trap.
I would, be on my way driving to the gas station and make a detour to like Marshall's and Burlington Coat Factory and Ross, right? So I would just make these, I was having sort of these wallet leaks. And that was when I realized that something had to change. The other piece.
Ooh, I love that saying, a wallet leak.
Yeah. I was happy.
I think what happened too, and I could say this for myself, when I was in a different financial situation than I am now, there was a point where I was like, had no money and I was living paycheck to paycheck and barely getting by. And for me, it was so scary to look at it. It was so scary to look at where the money was going or look at the credit card bill. And so there was so much avoidance there, which was not serving me and was not helpful. Like it was, but I think that's a real thing. Like this, like yeah, it makes sense to look at it. You actually do feel a lot better when you look at it. It feels more, manageable, or you just get a clearer picture. But for me, certainly, and I imagine the clients that you work with, and maybe even yourself, there was just this fear to even look at it.
Yeah, again, in my mind, up until that point, I thought I was good with money. I was putting money aside when I could, and I tried to avoid spending more than I earned, but really I was like spending every single dollar that I earned. And so having that realization that if I missed a paycheck, certainly if I missed two paychecks, that I was going to lose everything that I had, right? I also thought, because in some ways I was a little frugal, right? I wouldn't buy $300 pair of jeans, but I had, 60 pair of jeans that cost $40, $50, and I only wore like the same three, right? I had clothes with tags on it or shoes that I would never wear or maybe wear once, right? So I began to see like where my money was going. There's a saying that says, if you want to know what someone values, look at their transaction history. And at that point, I think people would say that I valued clothes and shoes. And though I liked clothes and shoes, it wasn't truly what I valued. So all of these like little
Mm,
awarenesses really helped me to realize that I had to do something different. And that was sort of where my journey began. So, number one, really understand what my income was. It wasn't my salary, right? Just because you might be a six-figure earner doesn't mean you can be a six-figure spender, right? So really
right,
understanding what
right.
my income was, understanding what my expenses was, and trying to figure out really what it was that I wanted to be intentional about spending money on. So being, going from like a mindless spender to an intentional spender, right? Or a mindless shopper to an intentional spender. And so that was sort of my money journey. And it was through that, I continued to make small changes because I needed to start with the baby steps. So it went from like buying lunch
Hmm.
every day to maybe buying lunch 4 times a week and then maybe 3 times a week and packing lunch, right? So I started to make those types of decisions. As I increased my savings and I realized that saving money was great for emergencies and it was great for those short term goals. When I was thinking about long term
Hmm.
goals, saving money wasn't going to be enough. And I needed to use a wealth building tool. I needed to use sort of a wealth accelerator in order to do that. And for me, that became investing. And I'm not talking about day trading and having 16 screens and reading charts
Ah,
and things like that. It was keeping it very simple. And that was one of the other components that I realized that I was missing out of my financial toolkit. Sure, I had a checking account and I had a savings account, but I really wasn't using anything intentionally to begin to build wealth and sort of have my money grow and multiply
right.
for me.
I mean, I just think that is so incredible. And it sounds like so much was self learned. And I think that can be overwhelming and scary. But I think it's amazing that you kind of educated yourself on this, because I think there are so many ways where we can make small changes and then have our money work for us. But I think, it's interesting, these topics we talk about. I think there's just so little conversation, and there's more conversations happening. But I feel like, when we talk a lot about fertility and egg freezing, it's like, why didn't anybody tell us, or how didn't we know this? And I feel like the same can apply for money. And even as you're talking, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to hire her as my coach, because I'm like, how should my money make money? But I love what you said too about the small changes. And I'm curious, like, how often you see that with your clients, because I know even in the therapy space, I have clients that like feel trapped by their job, want to get out, but they're like, I still want to travel. I still want to, like, go out to drinks with friends. So it's almost like they have adopted this idea that in order to save or be financially secure, they have to give all the things up.
Yeah, one of my huge like sort of like taglines, right? It's like reach financial independence without deprivation, right? It's not about giving up everything that you love. It's not about extreme frugality just so that you could have a great life later on. it's so important to enjoy the journey. But we want to be intentional with where our money is going, right? As I mentioned, they say if you want to know what someone values, take a look at their statements. And when we think about where our money is going, if we have if we think to ourselves, and as we ask ourselves that question, well, where is my money going? And our response is, I don't know, then that should be a little bit of an awareness that maybe we should begin to care about what it is that we're doing with our money, right? Is it allowing us to live the life that we want? If your priority, for example, is traveling, is your wallet, is your credit card statements reflecting a life full of travel, right? For this conversation, right? If your goal is to have a family or to freeze your eggs or to prepare for what parenthood could look like, do you have a financial plan to support that goal and that dream, right? So we want to make sure that there is a balance of what we want today without forfeiting what we may need and what we will want in the future. And so making sure that we have that healthy balance of both.
Yeah. And I feel like once you, again, like move through the fear of actually looking at it and really sit down with it, I love, like, I have this vision of you on that weekend, just like notes everywhere, Excels, I totally relate to that too. I think that the intentionality, the mindfulness of it is when you really look at it, you can see like you can do both. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think sometimes we're so black and white where it's like, if I want X, I have to give up Y, where it's like, it's the same, I have all these conversations in therapy too. It's like, you can feel two things at once. You can feel both things. You could do both things. And so just having that ability to look at it and say, okay, like, maybe there's small things you do have to give up, like you said, the example with lunch, but it doesn't have to be a complete trade-off. And I even think just putting that message out there is helpful for people that want to start to take a look at their finances.
Right. Or even, especially with your community and your audience, right? It's like, well, should we get into debt for this? Should I put this on a credit card? Should I take out a loan, right? What do I do if I do have credit card? Does that mean my dreams get put on hold and I need to focus on that, right? So it's a way of, like, when we're thinking about our finances, and yes, your idea of what my weekend looked like was very spread out, right? But a lot of people, just the idea of that, just the thought of that will stop them from taking a look at their finances. And this is what I really began to realize as I became aware and gained a new awareness and sort of, I had this huge desire to, like, consume and learn everything that I could, that it wasn't just the financial education piece, right? It's the actual implementation and implementing the strategies that you learn, right? Because as I mentioned, most of us know what we should be doing with our money. Maybe we don't know all the things available to us, but we know we probably shouldn't be, if you earn $8,000 a month, that you shouldn't be spending $9,000 a month, right? So, like, some of those basic things, most of us know. But why is it that we find ourselves overspending, getting into debt, not being able to make progress in our finances? And a lot of that has to do with our mindset and our relationship with money, right? I grew up in the Bronx, born and raised in the Bronx, the poorest borough in New York City. And everyone around me was lower income, right? So I didn't even, we weren't in poverty, but we were really low income, right? Lights getting turned off, things like that. We always had food on the table and thankfully a roof over our head, but, like, money wasn't abundant. And I think one of the things that happened for me was as I began to earn money, I was like, oh, what do you do with the extra? And I was like, okay, well, my bills are getting paid. Yeah. Check. I guess I get to spend it all, because I didn't really know what to do. And also there was maybe a sense of, like, deprivation that happened for me when I was a kid, right? Not being able to get the clothes that all my classmates had, or the fun, cool backpacks and toys or gadgets, right? And our family wasn't able to afford that. So as I got older and I now had this discretionary spending, I just wanted to fill that void. And that on the surface may not seem like a bad thing. It's like, well, I work hard. Like, shouldn't I be able to play hard as well? And the answer is sure, as long as it's also acknowledging and you're recognizing not just what you want today, but also what you should need. And one of the ideas, I'm not sure if you've ever heard this term, but what I sort of became a part of the community, or I joined this journey called the FIRE movement. And essentially, FIRE stands for
No.
Financially Independent Retiring Early. And the whole idea
Oh,
is,
I have heard
we've been.
that. One of my clients, yeah. Oh, I love that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm telling you, I'm a money nerd and I'm sort of interested about all of this.
I don't know if you see this with your clients, or like I'm listening, I'm thinking about my own financial situation. And I think for me, as I've become more financially independent and like in a better place, like I look at it less, which I probably should look at it more. Cause so it's like, it's prompting me to be like, where's my money? Where is my money going? I've worked really hard. I'm in a fortunate place that's like, I know everything's getting paid for and there is, extra, but I think that makes me less mindful, but I don't think that's necessarily a good thing.
I mean, it's really interesting, right? So I have clients, single moms who are bringing home $60,000 a year. And then I also have work with couples who are earning seven figures, right? With my higher income earners, one of the things that we really want to focus on is sort of getting organized with money and really making sure that they understand where their money is going, because what's being hidden is the fact that they have such high incomes. It's still these huge wallet leaks that happen, right? Like, oh, I didn't realize we have, in our home, we have 3 subscriptions for Netflix, right? And, it's sort of becoming aware. We started getting into the conversation of, the FIRE movement or the FIRE journey, right? Financial independence, retiring early. And I was able to give in my notice and walk away from my career of 19 years in public interest
Wow.
because I was financially independent. But people don't, the sort of retirement police, because I do financial coaching, right? And I am earning money. So I've replaced the RE of retiring early I'm just refocusing my energy, right? I'm refocusing my energy in helping people build wealth, build generational wealth, create their work optional plan, create their plan to be financially independent, right? Because I love the work, right? I work and I've built this business because I want other people to experience the freedom that comes with knowing that financially you are going to be taken care of, right? That your money is, it's not just financially surviving, you're actually financially thriving, and that you feel security first and then confident when it comes to your money.
I want to take the time now, because we did start talking about like IVF and egg freezing and planning for that. And I love the idea that you introduced here of attaching value. Like, is your transactions aligned with your value? And I think what's hard with the IVF egg freezing stuff, I don't know, like if a lot of women, and I can share for myself, think that they're going to end up in a position where they have to freeze their eggs. And so I froze at 37 and did have to put it on a credit card. And I remember specifically one episode of this podcast having this conversation is that you don't plan for that. Like you don't plan to have to do that. You don't plan, or it's not a financial goal in the same way as like, I want to buy a condo, or I want to buy a home, or I want to save for this trip, or I want to save for financial independence. And so I was curious, like, well, I want you to share about your client experience that sort of prompted you to think about IVF, and two, how many women or couples that you work with that are just like, we didn't plan for this. We didn't think we would have to plan for this.
Yes. So I was working with a client and she, high income earner, professional, didn't have any debt, but she had some financial goals that she wanted to save for, and she wanted to learn how to build wealth and how to invest, right? One of the goals that she had on her list was freezing her eggs. So honestly, the first time I had really ever heard of this concept was like Kim Kardashian, like sort of joking or kind of flippantly saying, should I freeze my eggs? Am I at that age of like freezing my eggs, right? So that was like kind of the experience that I had with it. And I remember as she began to set money aside for this, I began to think about myself. So my husband and I didn't get married. Well, he's younger than me by a couple of years. Mm-hmm. So we didn't get married until I was in my 30s. And I knew that I didn't want to have kids right away, that I was going to push it off. But naively, I thought, well, if, it gets quote unquote too late, or if it gets late, I'll just do IVF, thinking that IVF was like magic. It was like the science, you're guaranteed a baby and that's it. Like everybody that I knew, and when I say that I knew, I'm talking about, from a distance, celebrities or people in the public eye, did IVF and they got pregnant and they had a baby or maybe twins or something like that. So that was kind of how I thought about it, was, okay, like that's just going to be the thing. So I began to think about that. And I told my husband, I said, I know that like there's something about like egg quality, like going down. And like, as you get older for women, like, it increases the chances of certain like birth defects and things like that. So maybe I should consider just like freezing my eggs, was kind of what I thought. And we began having the conversation. For my husband, it was like, well, why do the egg freezing? Like, should we just start thinking about having children? And I said, I don't know, not yet. I'm not quite ready, right? I'm not quite ready, but maybe this could be like an alternative. And so I just so happened a few months later, this wasn't a short process or a quick process. A few months later, I had my annual OBGYN appointment, and I mentioned it to her. And I said, I'm in my late 30s now, should I, like, what should I do about fertility? And she's like, well, are you interested in getting pregnant? And I was like, not yet, but I don't know. She said, you know what, just go get tested. And I had to bring up the conversation. And I think that was one of the lessons. And I know you've talked about this before. I wish somebody would have just like given me the insight. Just like with finances, we don't learn this stuff in school. Like I went through high school, I went through college. Nobody had a conversation with me about checking accounts, savings accounts, 401ks, IRAs. Nobody had a conversation with me about that. And no one really explained to me what happens, right? Like I said, I like learned about egg freezing from Kim Kardashian in an episode, and then like my experience with my client. And also naively, I was just like, oh, if we have fertility issues, I'll just do IVF. Like that was the magic pill, and really being like naive about what that actually meant. We ended up making an appointment with a fertility clinic, and sort of said, yeah, I'm not interested right now, but just kind of, it was suggested that we should like get our levels checked out. And the fertility specialist said, yeah, let's start off with some blood work. And that was kind of what started a very long eye-awakening moment for me.
Yeah. And you're so not alone in, I don't know if it's being naive. It's just not being informed or educated, because nobody, I think just until like recently or in the last handful of years, like that we're really having these conversations and getting more clear on what this journey looks like. And even now for me, and I shared offline, like I am, fresh off of two attempts and 2 transfers that didn't work. And I've learned a tremendous amount through that experience. And there's just so much we don't know. And it's so funny because you're not the only one that has learned about egg freezing through reality shows. Mm-hmm. And we've also talked about sort of the harmfulness of celebrities being less transparent about their fertility journeys, because it does make it seem like it just happens, or you could have kids in your 50s. And I find that really frustrating, because they're not, it's their choice not to share, but it isn't like it just, you snap your fingers, you do IVF and you have babies or multiple babies. So you're certainly not alone there. I'd be curious to hear for you, like what the journey ended up being, if you don't mind sharing. financially what it looked like for you and your husband. I know you mentioned earlier about, questions of, will you work with women that are saving or thinking about these things? And the question of like, do you go into debt for it? And I'll share that I did go into debt for it. I didn't have the money at the time. I put it on a credit card and it was like, over $15,000.
Yeah. Once, even when we did the blood work, I remember going, and I'm one of those people who like, I can't get blood taken from my arms because I don't have a good vein. So they have to like pull it from my hands. And like, I remember it was like 30 vial, like it was like one of those like things, but I was still like, and I remember like, as the conversation sort of evolved with my husband, I said, you know what? I think we should just do IVF. I think it'll, being a little bit of a control freak, I was like, I could like control a couple of little things. Again, part of my naiveness. And I was like, yep, that's just going to be the plan. We are going to, I decided for both of us, I've decided that we are just going to do IVF no matter what, right? Like that was sort of my thinking. And so after the blood work, the lab results came back. So we met with the fertility specialist. And it was like the joke was on me, right? It wasn't that I was choosing to do IVF. I had no choice. The only way I would
really
would happen, the only way that I would get pregnant was if I had scientific intervention. Like it was just, and that was just shocking. I was just in shock, and it was like the joke was on me, and I felt very disempowered, right? Because it went from, I think one of the reasons why I was like, I don't want to get pregnant yet was because I was still even thinking about, would we just be like a child-free couple? And I had toyed with that idea as well, in my 20s, I probably would have said, oh yeah, I'll have a kid, or something like that. But like, I wasn't, some people are like, oh, ever since I was a child playing with toys, I wanted to be a mother. Like I didn't have that, but I never thought that I wouldn't be an option. Right. And I liked having options. Most people do like having options. And so when we had that second appointment after the blood work, and it was like, my hormones, my levels, everything was really low. I was, I sort of joked, and I was like, like my eggs were powdered milk at that point, like we're just like dust at that point. I was just like in a really bad place. And I'm not powdered milk. I would say my eggs were scrambled. That's what I would say. And it was really, really hard. And it was a blow that I wasn't expecting. And then it went from, we're just gathering information to, we need to start now. And that wasn't a journey that I was ready to have. I wasn't ready to do all of that, but I felt like the clock was ticking. And so, from our first appointment, to the second appointment, was like maybe 2 weeks. And then I think after that second appointment, it was a month later that we began treatments to start our IVF journey. One of the things that I had to learn really fast was, in my health plan, there wasn't a section that said we cover IVF, we cover fertility treatments. But one of the things that happened for me was, because I was in a situation where I didn't have a choice, like it was the only way that it was going to really, I don't want to say only, because you just never know, but like the likelihood of me getting pregnant on my own was really quite low. That helped, and come to find out, my health insurance did cover the treatments. That being said, we've spent over $20,000 out of pocket on top of all of the with all the medications and things that insurance doesn't cover, like testing, co-pays, things like that. I had a very high deductible. So we had insurance, and we still came out of pocket $20,000. And we started 4 rounds of IVF, and we ended up doing 3 egg retrievals. I was I'm the type of person that I like to know information. Information calms my nervous system. I want to know the good, the bad. The more
Mm-hmm,
information
mm-hmm.
I know, the better informed I am, the calmer I am. And so I started listening to podcasts, watching YouTube videos, listening to other people's stories. And one of the things, especially on YouTube, you know, people would talk about their egg retrieval having 20 eggs or having 15. I think the least amount that I saw was like 7. So I had this range of 7 to 20. And when we did our first egg
Mm-hmm.
retrieval, I had 3. And that was really devastating, again, because my knowledge of what that would be was like 7 to 20. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And our doctor was just great. You know, she's like, we only need 1 or as many as, as many, as many babies as you want. So I was just like, okay. And we chose IVF. So my husband did his sample anyway. So we also agreed to do testing.
Mm-hmm.
So we waited to see how many of those eggs would fertilize and turn into embryos. And out of the 3, only 1 made it to embryo stage. And then testing was not good. It wasn't going to be a viable pregnancy.
Oh.
So it was just like, what a blow. It was really, really hard. And, but we did it again. We did it a second time. And it was just, it was one of the things with fertility that happened was that I remember hearing other people, like in my circle, like friends who mention struggling with fertility. But when I started going through my own journey, when I reached out to them, they never got to this point. It was, oh, we struggled, but and then we got pregnant naturally.
Yeah.
Or we were just about to, and then and so now I felt really alone because I didn't know anyone else who was in this situation. And it was very isolating. I also didn't share my journey with many people because it felt really hard. It felt really, really hard. And, we started one round and then we ended up having to, we had to sort of stop that. I couldn't continue with the medication. So we didn't do any egg retrievals during the second time. Then we tried a third time. Then I took a break and then we did it. And it just never worked out. So IVF, that journey was quite emotional. Obviously, I was going through it with my partner, but it was still felt lonely. It felt really lonely, even though he was going through it too, because those were our losses. But it just felt really hard. So after 4 rounds of IVF, like I said, we did 3 egg retrievals. One of them we didn't even get to the egg retrieval phase. I decided that I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't do the medications. I couldn't
It's so much.
I couldn't deal with it. It was a lot. And sort of life after IVF, then there's that emotional component because I had to grieve motherhood, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even though there was some part of me that was like, oh, I think maybe child-free life would be okay. It's a different story when it's an option versus
totally.
You don't have that option is sort of like taken away from you. And sort of going through that. And, my husband also had to grieve, right? And I think I came to terms with it a little bit faster. Not a little bit. I did come to terms with it faster than he did, but he had to grieve that process a lot because, for him, it was like, well, maybe we should try one more time, or maybe we could do something else, or maybe we should try naturally, or maybe we should. And so, it took him a lot longer to sort of come to terms to sort of the hand that we were dealt.
Yeah, I want to just say, one, I'm so grateful and appreciative that you're sharing your story here. And I know you haven't shared it on a podcast yet and you were nervous to do so, but I think your story is so incredibly important because it sort of sheds light on that sometimes it doesn't work and what does that look like, right? And so what you had said earlier was like this idea that like, well, we'll just do IVF and then we'll have a baby. And I think it's just there's a lot of like misunderstanding and expectation. Like I even went into my rounds thinking very different things. And I, I thought I have a genetically normal embryo and it implants, it'll work. And that was not the case. So I think it's, there are so many women out there that have had, and everybody's journey is unique, but I think that it's important to shed light on, sometimes it doesn't work. And then what does that look like? And to your point, like the grieving process and, rewriting a vision of life. And I think what you said too about the pain when it's not an option. Like we're having to process and accept this new vision, but it wasn't an option for us.
One of the things that, sort of to kind of come full circle with like finances was my insurance covered 3 egg retrievals. So one of the reasons why we stopped medications during one of the rounds was because it seemed like there was only 1 egg. And so it was like, well, do we want to use the egg retrieval for just 1 egg, right? And so we decided not to and try to, change medications and dosage and like try a couple different things to see if, what would work for us. And I think about being able, my husband and I at this point, so we had sort of started our financial transformation journey back at the end of 2015, the beginning of 2016. So we began to increase the amount of money that we were saving, and we began to, contribute more money to retirement plans and things like that, which help us, grow money through investing and things like that. So when I found out that the IVF was going to be covered with my insurance, I felt really good about that until I started getting the line items of things that insurance wouldn't cover and how quickly those numbers began to add up. And as I mentioned, my insurance covered 3 egg retrievals, but there were 3 rounds or 4 rounds of things that my insurance didn't cover. And every time we had to go and dip into our savings. And, it wasn't a question for us about whether or not we would pull from savings, right? Because when we thought about what our goals were and also what we valued, it made sense for us to be able to pull money from there in order to afford, to be able to afford the treatments and to afford that journey. But I have, met people and, not met people, some of my clients, who their insurance doesn't cover it at all. And so they have like the one shot, right? And then it's the question as to, well, what happens if it doesn't work, right? What are your options? What do you want to consider if it doesn't work, right? And as you mentioned, for you, you made the decision about going into debt for it. And I will say I'm very neutral when it comes to debt. Debt isn't good or bad. It's our thoughts and our feelings that come from that situation, right? So credit card, mortgages, student loans, right? It's just it's just debt. But it's how we think about it and the emotions that come up for us when we're thinking about that debt. And not all debt is treated the same, right? One of the plans when my clients are trying to figure out a debt payoff plan, right? There's okay, let's look at what's costing us the most to carry this debt, right? Which debt has the highest interest? Usually it's like credit card debt, right? Credit card debt or credit card interest could be 20, 30% versus, student loans, which might be 7%. Or if you were so lucky to have a car note or a mortgage, that's like 3 or 4%, right? So there's sort of that number to think of. Okay, let's look at our options when we're listing out all of the debt. What is the highest to lowest interest? But one of the other factors that I take into consideration and I want my clients to think about is which one is causing you the most emotional trauma, or what is the emotional burden, right? So if I have a client that I'm working with who has a outstanding invoice to a divorce attorney, for example, and every time she looks at this balance, it's just causing her grief.
Yes.
She
Yes.
may want to get rid of that ASAP, even if the interest rate is not existent, right? Even if there's no interest rate, right? So there's like the mathematical equations. I think it's important to understand, right? How to financially optimize our debt payoff plan, but and then we cannot overlook the emotional burden that these debts have. So sometimes I've worked with a client, and she looked at her medical debt, and it was from the birth of her child, and she's like, I've been paying this debt for 4 years and I owe more than when I started off with. And it's sort of the rethinking of, but what did that debt allow you to do? Right. And it
I
went
love
from
that.
sort of like, debt feels so heavy, to this debt allowed me to have my daughter. Right. And now the emotional burden that debt had on her, and how heavy she felt, she just feels easier and lighter about it. So it's so important that as we make decisions about debt, whether it's, getting an advanced degree or going through IVF, right? It's a very different situation. Now, I will say I'm a natural spender, and I could justify almost any purchase, right? I could say, well, I'm going to save 10% if I buy this on discount, right? But is that making a decision now about how I'm going to spend money, is that going to prevent me to make a decision later on about what I need in the future, right? Do I want to be paying today for decisions I made 2 months ago, right? And sort of really finding that happy balance.
Yeah. I know. I love how you weave in the emotional piece, because when I think about, fertility is so emotional and complex and so layered, and just the frustration of having to think about, well, how do I financially pay for this, and thinking about having to go into debt. And I think you really touched on like having to reconcile that emotional piece for yourself. And for me, it was this frustration, because it's like, well, one, I don't have this money, but like, what does it mean if I don't do this? But also, what does it mean if I drop $15,000 on this and I don't get nothing? It's really like, there's no straight return on your investment. There might be no return on your investment. And I think really when it comes to it, and for me personally, it was that emotional piece. And really what made my decision was like, I don't want to regret not trying. And so, I had to come to that like emotional understanding and reconciling that, to say, okay, I will go into debt for this. So it's such a hard decision. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about some of the clients that you work with. And it sounds like you had this one client that introduced this idea of IVF and saving for it. And you did mention now you have more women. So do you see that more, that women are thinking about potentially saving for this, or maybe they're in their later 30s and they're doing it, and how do you coach them to think about it financially, or what are some plans that you guys come up with together?
Yeah, I work with a variety of clients, and one of the things that we talk about is sort of the short-term goals. And when we're thinking about short-term financial goals, is what do I want money for or need money for in the next, 3, 6, 12 months, right? So that could be vacation, that could be, a home renovation project, that could be, making a big purchase. So we really think about, okay, what do we want in the next 12 months, maybe 18 months or less. And then we think about midterm goals, and then of course, long-term goals. So midterm goals are those goals that maybe you have a little bit more flexibility. It could happen in 2 years, but it could happen in 3 years. Maybe it's going to require a longer time frame for you to build up enough money, maybe like a home down payment for, a down payment for a home. So we think about those midterm goals. And then those long-term goals are things like saving for a kid's college fund, right? Or saving for retirement, right? And, we've been sort of fed this lie that retirement age is 65. But that is not retirement age, right? Retirement age is when you have enough. And for some people, waiting until 65 in order to retire just seems too long. And that was sort of the situation for me. I couldn't, even though I had a career that I loved, I couldn't imagine like giving up all of that time and all of those hours, at a 9 to 5. And so in the beginning, it was like, well, what about if I could do 55? Is that possible? Right. And what would the path look like if I wanted to retire at 50 and then 45? And, we reached financial independence by the time I was 39. So, it happened
Amazing.
fairly much quicker than I had anticipated. So when I'm talking to my clients about their goal setting and their dreaming about what their life is, family planning can come up, right? I target mainly women, but some of those women are married, and I love when they have a supportive onboard spouse about changing their finances, and they can come to financial coaching together. I think that's great, but I also work with women who are married or who are partnered, who do not mix or mingle, or they have very separate finances, right?
Mm-hmm.
But maybe they share similar goals, or sometimes it's completely opposite, right? So all of those things, one of the people that we didn't end up working on a one-to-one capacity, but it was a gay man who wanted to have money for his surrogacy, right? And he was thinking, this is a financial goal that, this is a goal that I have for my life, and I want my finances to be able to support that journey of surrogacy, right? So when we're thinking about family planning, or when we're thinking about financial goals, like family plans is inevitably a part of it, right? I also work with
Yeah.
a lot of first generation or children of immigrants, and like culturally, we have to think about taking care of our parents, right? In a way
Mm-hmm.
that some other cultures may not really think about. So it's like, okay, how do I take care of my family, my children, and also the past generation, my parents, right? How do I make sure that they're going to be financially good as well? So, all of this throughout financial coaching, right? It's a process. It's not an event, right? It's a journey, and it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And we really want to be taking all of these different life aspects one piece at a time, right? The way we think about saving for short-term goals is going to be very different than the way we think about saving for long-term goals, right? And
Yeah.
what your priority is, whether it is to be able to fly first class every time you travel, the way we think about that and the way we plan for that might be a little bit different than the way we plan for how do I pay for quarterly taxes as a self-employed person, right? So all of these, all of our life decisions, so many of them have to deal with money, right? Money gives us it's just a tool in
Yeah.
how we build the lives that we want, and live the life that we want.
Yeah. Ugh, I know. I love that. And I find myself personally, like, as a therapist that has gone through all this fertility stuff, and now even, the most recent fertility stuff, I'm curious for you, because this happens for me. And I've worked with a lot of my clients for such a long time. But when I find myself in sessions with women in their 30s, mid 30s, like, I feel motivated to bring up the conversation of egg freezing, right? And I think a lot of the frustration for women earlier had been like, no one has talked to me about it. So I'm curious for you, like, if you find yourself working with a client that's like 31, 32, single, like, do you find yourself wanting to be like, let's think about, like, what about family planning, or what about, like, do you think about egg freezing, or do you think about saving for egg freezing? Do you ever find yourself bringing it up or wanting to bring it up?
This is something that I'm really torn about, right? Because I have seen people, specifically on Instagram, say, don't tell me about, egg freezing, right? And I'm like, darling, I just want you to know that it may not be as simple as that, right? Like, it
Yeah.
may not be as simple as that, and just to consider it. And how would you feel if it wasn't an option for you? Right. And that's the only thing. Because for me, I was like I said, I did get married in my 30s. So I knew that I was going to be like older in that process, but I just thought, oh, IVF is going to be my solution, right? Like,
Yeah.
not really understanding the IVF journey, right? And understanding what biology allows for, doesn't allow for, and like luck and all of these things, right? So I think it's part of my responsibility as a financial coach to have a holistic approach when it comes to finances, to make sure that people aren't underspending, right? Sometimes my homework assignments for my client is go buy the thing. Go spend the money on the vacation, go hire the house cleaner, right? So sometimes that's part of the work, is to make sure that we are spending with what we value and what's important to us. But I also think part of my work is to, not only think about what we want right now, but also what we're going to want in the future. And so for my clients who are married or unmarried, family planning does come up. I have not been in a situation yet where I have brought up family planning and someone did not think, or someone didn't sort of respond to me that they have thought about freezing their eggs or that they have thought about IVF. So that's been amazing, because there is sort of this idea, and I share my journey about, it's not just one round and you're good, right? So we need to prepare for the worst. We hope for the best, but we want to prepare financially for the worst case scenario, that it may not just be one round. And if it is just one round, great. Now you have a nursery, fund that you can use, right?
Okay. No, I was just going to add, and also for your experience that, just because insurance covers it doesn't mean that it's all covered, and that you might not you have to plan for how many thousands of dollars have to still come out of your pocket.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. Yep. That's exactly right.
Yeah. Oh, well, I before we wrap up, one, I'm going to email you because I want to connect with you personally, but share where everyone can find you, because I think that you offer such an amazing service. I think education is empowerment, whether it's financial, fertility, anything, right? Because without any knowledge or information, we can't make informed decisions. So please tell the audience where they can find you. I'm sure everyone's going to want to, myself included, be reaching out to you for your help and your support.
Well, thank you so much, Beth, for having me. When I saw this podcast pop up, I looked at it and I wasn't sure if I was going to sort of submit my pitch to you. But I thought it was really important because I've seen it in my own financial coaching practice and also in my own life, how much finances can affect the decision and, your emotional and mental health when you're trying to make those type of decisions. And as I mentioned, money is just a tool, but it is laden with emotions and how we manage the decisions that we've made. Some people can fall into shame, right? And guilt about, well, I should have done this, or I wish I would have. But to really sort of start on a financial wellness journey really can begin at any time, as when you decide to start on that financial wellness journey. So I'm most active on Instagram. People can find me at financially_thriving. But if you go to my website, which is financiallythriving.com, you'll find my socials and find out a little bit more about my story, and a little bit more about my financial coaching program.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your journey and all your knowledge. You're doing incredible, incredible work. So I appreciate you, and I appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
If you like the episodes that you're hearing and you want to hear more, please subscribe to our channel and stay tuned for more incredible stories and tools.
When I froze my eggs at 37, I felt alone, I felt unsure, I felt confused and uncertain. And when you're considering such a big decision, feeling those ways do not feel good. So we have created a step-by-step guide to egg freezing so no one else has to feel that way. If you are considering egg freezing, if you're curious about what the process looks like or what you should be thinking about, then this guide is for you. We were really thoughtful in how we put it together. I think it's a great guide. I think it's really comprehensive and covers a lot of the things to be thinking about, to be considering, and maybe some things you didn't even realize you should be thinking about or considering. The goal is to not have anyone feel alone in this journey. So if you're thinking about this decision, sign up through our website, quiettheclock.com, and make sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at quiettheclockpod. This is a very big decision, so I don't want anyone to feel alone in it. So if you're thinking about it, grab this guide, and you can also DM me with any questions. I'm here to support you through this decision and this journey.